Hello, Dr. Homish. A pleasure to have this opportunity to chat. Before we start, it would be great if you can perhaps introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us what you have done here at UB and how do you feel about teamwork in academia and in your career specifically.
Great. Well, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to come and chat with you this morning. I appreciate that. My name is Greg Homish. I'm professor and chair of the Department of Community Health and Health Behavior here at the School of Public Health and Health Professions. I'm a passionate believer in team science. I think our biggest example is our T32 training program here that we've had at UB since 2020. That I think is a great example of how a team science grant would focus. That's had multiple PIs over the last 25 years. I've been fortunate enough to be the co-PI for this last iteration, along with Ken Leonard in our Department of Psychiatry and Jen Reed in our Department of Psychology. This is a training program funded by NIH continuously for the last 25 years, looking at training the next generation of alcohol researchers. We train researchers at the predoctoral and postdoctoral level. And in order to do that, we use multiple units and multiple departments within UB, including our School of Public Health and Health Professions, the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, the College of Arts and Sciences, and our School of Social Work. So we're bringing together a lot of different disciplines. We have basic science and animal models represented all the way through clinical practice and treatment. So that's kind of a brief overview.
Oh, fantastic. So you mentioned that the training grant been renewed multiple times and that it was initially started back in the times when we didn't use the word team science. So was it always interdisciplinary collaborative? How do you think, if you were there, how do you think this idea of teaming up across multiple domains even started?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So even in its beginning roots, Gerard Connors, who was then the director of the Research Institute on Addictions, and Lorraine Collins, who was a senior research scientist also at the Research Institute on Addictions, came together with the idea to create a multidisciplinary training program. In its foundation, it started off just being focused on postdoctoral training, but even at that point, it was focused on basic science, public health, and clinical practice. So even in the very beginning, multiple disciplines were integrated together before anybody really even thought about team science. They were kind of doing it on their own. And then over the time, it's evolved to involve many more departments and to include predoctoral trainees in the last 5 years.
That is very interesting and very forward-looking for those founding members. Again, without putting sort of the words in my mouth, if you would be in their position, why would you even look for cross-disciplinary work? That requires a lot more time, right? This is the main reason people choose to work alone, because you have better control, you think you're much more efficient. Why would you go outside of that comfort zone?
Well, I think probably to tap into innovation. Looking across disciplines really allows us to think about different methods. Something that might be standard in one field might be completely different in another field. So bringing together different disciplines and different perspectives, I think, was really their thought process on how to advance the field. And to be thinking about animal models along with human models together, they complement each other. And I think there was that recognition in the area of substance use research for many years.
That is a very good point. So innovation, especially when addressing such a complex human and social problems like substance use, naturally asks for collaborative interdisciplinary work.
Exactly.
Are there any other reasons, and maybe now with your most current experience of submitting and resubmitting this grant multiple times, are there any other uses for teamwork that you find that our viewers should really know about? Is it only innovation, or perhaps other logistical challenges that you need your teams to be able to address timely?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things to consider there. I think from the training perspective, I think that it gives the trainees a lot more perspective on kind of what's out there, what's bigger than their own discipline. So I think that that's an important key here. And when you're thinking about a complicated phenomenon like substance use, as you mentioned, I think that coming at it at a single angle with a single lens is not going to be helpful. And I think that was one of the hallmark features. Each iteration of this grant, I feel like we become even more team focused. As I mentioned, when we got refunded 5 years ago, that's when we added pre-doctoral trainees to the mix, figuring we needed to start training earlier, that going at the postdoctoral level is late. And so I think each iteration has given us a chance to think about how do we expand this even more.
Interesting. And so you're talking about team across investigators and faculty across other schools and department. What about your administrative teams, the folks who work with you on writing the training grant and resubmitting the training grant and supporting the trainees in their various stages of development? How do those teams work?
Yeah, so we recently put in our renewal for years 26 through 30, and that was certainly a team effort. That was something that we couldn't have done just as the scientific core. Our Office of Research Advancement at UB was instrumental in pulling together all of this information. Unlike a traditional R01 that can be driven a lot by a PI and a co-investigator, training grants are extraordinarily complex, requiring us to capture data on trainees over the last 15 years. So it's a lot of record keeping. So without a team, it would be impossible for just the three of us as PIs to be able to collect all that data, to synthesize all that data, and to really report out on it. So without a team collecting that data, even from the point of graphic design, we brought in a graphic designer through the Office of Research Advancement to help communicate our message to a broader audience. So the reviewers for these training grants are very much team science. They're multidisciplinary in their review. And so what might be clear in the mind of a traditional substance use researcher may not be in somebody who's training a different type of researcher. So by using a graphic artist to kind of communicate our training plan, our idea of team science, I think that will hopefully be a very helpful perspective. So thinking about your team very broadly and not just about the science, but also about the communication to broader audiences, I think is key for moving the things forward.
That is very interesting. So as a team leader, you have to master various skills, right? You have to sort of support those very different teams, your teams of peers and faculty mentors, and your teams of administrators, project managers, and grant support staff. What kind of strategies do you use? Because you clearly are very successful in working those different types of teams.
Yeah, I think the big thing is open communication. We have a big team that was working on this, everybody from the graphic designer who I mentioned to people working on the budget, to people collecting data on where our trainees have gone, to looking at all the faculty across the different schools. So I think that the big thing is open communication, regular communication. Our Office of Research Advancement was really good about putting together timelines so that we knew our benchmarks of when we were going to hit certain things. And I think, unlike a lot of other grants, starting early is key. I mean, we started this project, the renewal, months in advance because we knew with this many people involved, it was going to take a lot of time and a lot of coordination. So having a good project manager in our Office of Research Advancement to establish milestones and benchmarks, and then for us to keep to it, I think was really an important step.
That's a very good point. So you clearly sort of formulated the trade-off, right? You have complex team with multiple expertise, but it takes time and it takes special teams coordinating.
Exactly.
So maybe to give us an idea. So as a team leader, and you a department director, a department chair, and you grant director, are you the lead? Are you able to assign people tasks and responsibilities, or do they come to you and says, Dr. Homish, you need me to deliver this by this date? Or do you negotiate? Sort of how does that team dynamics, this communication that you're talking about, what does it actually mean on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So there are three principal investigators on our training program. We mentioned Ken Leonard in our Department of Psychiatry and Jen Reed in our Department of Psychology. So we were kind of the overall administrative lead on this. Our Office of Research Advancement would propose those milestones, and then we would have to talk about, are these reasonable? Given the other demands on our schedule, none of us have this as our only project. We have multiple projects going on. So I think talking with our colleagues about what these timelines are and are they reasonable, especially when you're thinking about something as complicated as the budget. The budget, we might have a timeline that we think is reasonable, but it's going to be a matter of give and take and understanding that priorities shift over the course of this. What might be a priority for me today may not be for another team member. So we just need to be able to, again, go back to that open communication about moving targets.
That I can see could be a challenge. And so in your experience, what are the things that keep people together, keep them from walking away and saying, oh, this is too much work. I can go back to my office and work on my paper alone. What do you think keeps you together for all these years, despite challenges and difficulties and unique approaches?
I think keeping your eye on what's really important here. It would be easy to go back to your office and think about doing this on your own, but having only one opinion on anything, we're not going to have diversity of what we're doing here. We need different thoughts on what's going on. I think for the training program, all of us as training directors know what's important to us, and that's training the next generation of researchers. So figuring out how to do that, how to move that forward, and to realize we have their training in the heart of what we're doing, I think is really the key. So not losing focus on some administrative hoops that may be difficult to jump through, but at the end of the day will be worth it.
I see. That is an interesting point. So what I'm hearing you say is that there are multiple advantages to teamwork. So of course it's diversity of opinions, but it's also efficiency of administration. You may step back to focus on your R1 while your other colleagues are sort of moving the project, then you switch roles. So there are a lot of work that needs to be done on those complex projects, and probably not a single PI realistically can fulfill that very demanding role without dropping another ball, right?
I think that it's an important point, and NIH has really had an appreciation for the multiple PI approach in regular grants, but also for training grants. And it's come up in other reviews. They like the idea of there not being just one person leading the training program or the grant mechanism. When they instituted the multiple PI approach many years ago, there was some confusion as how we would make this work. And I think we have great evidence of how it's working now in both a regular research grant, but also in a training grant, where you can see having multiple perspectives is really quite important at this. And, I tell my trainees when I'm working with them, as they think about the key to publications, it's important that you have different publications at different points. This paper, you might be working on the introduction, where another paper, you might be working on the methods or results, where this paper, you might be looking at analysis. Having papers at different points helps you move all of those forward. And it's the same thing with this. None of us are focused just on the training program. When you hit a barrier on the training program, you move on to another project, you take some time away and you come back and go, okay, what's the best way of going forward? So I think the more on your plate is actually moving things forward in more productive ways, so you don't get stuck in one area.
That's a very good point. And then you have built-in support, right? If you're ready to tear your hair out, you can call Ken and complain to him.
Yes. Well, and I think there is some truth to that. Working through problems with other PIs, especially PIs who are very senior, it's really helpful because you're not alone. And, we don't have all the answers. And if you think you have all the answers, it's probably time for you to retire. So I think having a colleague who you can say, hey, I'm thinking about this idea. Tell me what you like about it, but also tell me what you hate about it and what's going to be a barrier to us moving forward. I think that's absolutely critical. And I think Ken, Jen, and I form a really nice team because we come at things with very different perspectives. And I think that helps move our trainees along. Even when we do seminars with the fellows, having multiple opinions in the room, I think is really helpful so that people can see different angles on how to tackle a problem.
Thank you for bringing that, because I think one of the common misconceptions about team is that you can only be on a team with the people who think the same way and people who are like you and share the same perspective. And you're clearly saying that there's actually a benefit of having team members who have different perspective and may critique your idea and offer a better solution.
I think that's absolutely essential. And, we have the three of us as the PIs for the grant, but then we also have a steering committee that has even more diverse perspectives on things, incorporating pharmacology and toxicology and social work and other aspects of public health. So I think if you get stuck in the mindset of this is the way to do it and not this is a way to do it, I think you really get stuck. And I think one of the successes of this program has really been the idea of having multiple levels of advisors at different points.
That's very interesting. And that's probably what happened to the training grants who, after many years, lose funding, is that they continue gliding on the rails of what they proposed the last time. And there is always competition. There's no guarantee you're going to get refunded every single time.
Exactly. And I think if you don't keep coming up with the next innovative idea of moving things forward, you get stuck. And it's more of the same old, and we don't need more of that because everything's constantly changing. So if we're not staying on top of things, I don't think we're providing the best training opportunities.
Very good point. Very valuable point. So before we finish, Dr. Homish, what would you recommend to somebody who feels that they're ready to apply for a training grant or ready to build a training program? What kind of advice would you offer to those folks from the many years of experience being a qualified mentor?
I think the big thing is to do a lot of fact finding. Unlike an R01 where maybe you need one or two co-investigators, this is a bigger project. I think you need to really be thinking about a lot of different perspectives on what kind of infrastructure you need. I think talking to people who have been successful in that space is really important. I think that just getting a lot of different perspectives on things. And I think the biggest key is start much earlier than you ever think you're going to need. It's a much more complicated process than many will think. So just getting a lot of input early on and then really being thoughtful in your deliberations on, is this the time to move forward with it?
Okay. And it sounds like it's also important to know what you don't know and find team members or experts who can complement your skills like graphic design or a budget development, and then be humble and open with them about what your vision is, but not micromanaging.
Yeah, and I think the perfect example of that is really with the graphic designer. The first time I met with the graphic designer, I didn't really know what I was looking for because I'd never really worked with a graphic designer. So I was able to kind of toss out my conceptual model. And he was able to take that conceptual model and put it to paper. And then through a series of back and forths, we were able to tweak things to get to a product that I never could have envisioned on my own. I don't have that skill set. I don't think that way. I don't communicate that way. But just talking with him and saying, hey, this is my thought process, and seeing how he was able to interpret that, and then how we were able to kind of, through an iterative process, get to a final product, I thought was really an exciting opportunity that was very different than my traditional approach to grant writing.
That's great analogy for teamwork, right?
Yes.
You never know what you're going to come up with.
Yes.
But there is that iterative process, forming, storming, performing, right? And well, I'm glad you were both patient and open-minded to arrive to this final project. And best of luck with your grant.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me this morning.
Thanks, Greg.